Hi, before I start, two announcements. First, we are performing the episode live, the fifth episode of Panchayat on 23rd June. There are no tickets. It's happening in Ahmedabad at Prayogshala. So drop by and come say hi. The other, we have removed the word podcast out of Poppedia because we are much more than that. But as you can see, we have not stopped doing podcast. So, and we are making a documentary, releasing a film, making another documentary, releasing another film, whilst we continue to talk with people. So, hello and welcome to Poppedia. My name is Kunal, and I'm going to discuss literature and the genre of crime and everything around that with Tanuj Solanki.
Okay, screw the mobile. Sorry.
Oh yes, it's yeah. How are you? How are you?
How are you, man?
I'm
So
good.
what's Poppedia? What does it do? I'm sorry I couldn't read too much about you.
Yes. So Poppedia, like when we started, I started with some of my school friends.
Hmm.
We wanted to do podcast. So at first it was podcast. It was called Poppedia podcast back then, like 5 to 6 months back. But now we just call it Poppedia because we now want to make films out of it. We are trying to kind of turn to a media channel where we want to take out documentaries, and that's why I was texting you continuously last night because I'm currently making a documentary about the cattle problem in Ahmedabad. So I wanted to plan the day according to that. So yeah, but so we basically do
Uh,
conversations and make films and stuff like that. Yeah.
okay, cool. And you look pretty young. I mean,
Yes. I study. I'm 18. I'm currently pursuing psychology at Gujarat University. My first year just got over. I'm in second year right now. Yeah.
oh, wonderful. So you're in Gujarat right now, Ahmedabad.
Ahmedabad, yes.
Okay, cool.
And where are you?
I am right now in Gurgaon.
Okay.
I worked for 9 to 10 years in Bombay,
Okay.
and I'm basically from Uttar Pradesh, Muzaffarnagar.
Okay. So your Hindi is quite strong, or
No, Hindi, English, both is fine. You want me to speak in Hindi?
no, no,
I
no, no,
can.
no. I just wanted to ask you something.
Hmm.
I was very confused with how I should start the conversation with you. But now that you say that you're from UP and all,
Hmm.
while I was reading Manjhi's Mayhem, I was constantly thinking that that book would have been sexy in Hindi. Like if you would have
Hmm.
written the book in Hindi, it would have
Hmm.
been way too sexy. That is something that I was thinking. Like, why did you write it in English? Was it because you were comfortable with English, or like is there any other reason?
So, very complicated answer actually. So, first, it can exist in Hindi.
Ah,
Like if I find time, sometimes I find myself writing it again in Hindi. It would be a translation, so to speak. I'll actually write it dobara
ah,
se in
yes,
Hindi
yes.
because certain things won't be necessary, right? And they are a problem for the translator. For example, the first paragraph, right? None of this happened in English. Now,
Ah,
if you're writing the book in Hindi, there's no need for that first sentence, right?
yes, yes.
So, so it can very well exist in Hindi. It's depending on whether I find the time to do that or not. The main reason why it was not written in Hindi originally is that my training for writing a crime novel, this is my first crime novel. I've written four
Ah,
books, but in this particular genre, this is my first.
hmm.
And my training was based a lot on my own reading of specifically American crime novels.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
So while I read a lot of crime novels in translation from Scandinavia or all over the world, really. But I was most attracted to a certain kind of American crime novel,
Hmm.
especially the pulp fiction type novel, not pulp fiction today, but what it was in 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s in the US.
Ah,
Right
yes, yes.
now, my attraction to it was partly because of how it used language.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
And so once my inspirations are so closely tied to how a certain language, in this case English, is used in a geography that is not mine, of course, it's in America, uh, that was the source of why I wanted to write Manji's Mayhem, right? So I was
Ah,
inspired in very, very crude ways. I was inspired by the Angrezi of certain novels written in the US from 30s to 60s, right? Now, if I am inspired like that, and so I didn't feel comfortable now writing this novel, this story in Hindi, right? I wanted to
ah,
stick to English. right? But there is a challenge because you can't just take that American English and use it in an Indian novel in an Indian setting, right? So hence you see a lot of sort of packaging, right? Some sort of verbal gymnastics right in the first paragraph, then sometimes calling out a certain word that अभी हिंदी में बोला है पर उसने ये नहीं बोला है वो बोला है, right? और इसका connotation अलग होता है, right? So that is gymnastics wherein I'm creating an entire package where I'm owning up to the fact that the action is happening in Hindi or Marathi, but it's been narrated to you in English. So, but at the same time, the packaging allows me to pay homage to the American crime novel also.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And reuse some of those tropes. In fact, if you notice the acknowledgements, right, most of the writers that I acknowledge are not Indian writers. Right, these are writers I was impressed by a lot. And another related point to that is that in India, you don't have a lot of pulp fiction in India. And certainly almost, so there might be novels which can be called pulp fiction or pulp crime novels, but there is not a tradition of them. In the US, there is a 70-year to 100-year tradition of that kind of a novel. Yeah.
And I was surprised to not have read your novel. I remember last week or so, they were like from last month, there have been people in my circle who've been constantly posting about your book, and it was nowhere in the scene, and suddenly everyone's talking about it. So that's why I texted you. And when I read it, that one thing that you're talking about, the consciously key, everyone's talking about how it never happened in English, it always happened in English. That works very nicely with your book, particularly because it's in English. But I was just thinking ki the setting, the story, अगर वो हिंदी होती तो it would have hit much harder to me personally. That's I guess what I'm trying to say. And the other thing that I also noticed about Manjhi's Mayhem was I read many. I like reading crime. Okay, I like crime films. I like the whole Scorsese का genre जो उसने फोड़ा. I like everything. While I was reading Manjhi's Mayhem, something about it felt fresh. I don't know what that is, but at the same time, I also kept thinking that the it also reminded me of विक्रम चंद्रा की Sacred Games. फिर एक किताब थी कृष्णा की करके अश्विन सांगी की. It reminded me of that. But I still thought कि something is fresh here, but I don't know what. Like, have you consciously planted something or not planted something that makes it new, or in that?
I think one of the key things is I've not read Krishna's Key. One of the things is that, see, two things I want to say is there are a few people like you who have told me that अरे यार हिंदी में होता तो कैसा होता, right? And there are also people who have said they read it, but they felt that they were reading a Hindi novel, right? In fact, the second kind of reader or that kind of response I've heard more. Okay, that so, and there's also a friend on Instagram who felt compelled to write a review of it in Hindi after reading it in English.
Okay.
So that is there. हिंदी में लोग पढ़ना चाहते हैं, पर हिंदी नॉवल बहुत लोग पढ़ते नहीं है, राइट? एक दूसरी चीज ये भी है कि जो अगर आप मुझसे कह रहे हो कि भाई हिंदी में होता तो, राइट, हिंदी में होता तो आप पढ़ते क्या? राइट, आप तक पहुंचता क्या?
ट्रू रीच नहीं होती है.
और आई एम नॉट गोइंग टू बी, नहीं, हिंदी के नॉवेल्स की रीच है, पर ऐसा नहीं है, देयर इज अ मार्केट, बट आई एम नॉट गोइंग टू बी सो सैंक्टिमोनियस टू से दैट the fact that Hindi in my case would have worked less, right? The fact that it was not a factor, right? I'm not going to say that it was 5-10% a factor. Saying here, I'm an English writer, I have written 3 books in English, I can write in Hindi, but and my inspirations are from English, so I would rather take this translation challenge on and write this novel in English. So that is to the first part. To the freshness, I would say here, there is this the crime novel, Sacred Games, right? It's a saga, right? It's a big fat book which led to a big 2-season show, right? Manjhi's Mayhem is a 50,000 word, 205 pages book, right? It's a small scale book. Okay. Even in terms of the progressions it wants to show, right? It is not taking on the world. The main villain, if you really talk about, let's say, the industrialist, right? That person never even appears, right? He's out of reach of the entire cast, right? Whereas if you compare it, let's say, to Sacred Games, right? it will go everywhere, right? It would have a Dawood equivalent. It would have like really big figures turn up in the novel. It's a big novel, right? Big in ambition, big in what it wants to say about the state of the nation at a particular point, right? And such novels have their space, but I always wanted to write a slim one, contained novel. And my feeling is that some of its freshness is because of that, because of the fact that it is not, in terms of plot or what it wants to say about the country, so to speak, right? It's not a very massive novel, right? It's a slim one. You enter, if you keep coming back to it for 3 nights, you will be done. And that partly is I guess, the freshness. Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, but it's tight. It's tight.
Yeah, it's tight. I mean, the idea is that if you read a couple of chapters, I mean, you shouldn't be able to forget about it, right? If you forget about it after reading a couple of chapters, then I've failed, right? Because it's anyway a small commitment to get into, right? That sort of thing can happen to you when you pick up Sacred Games. It's a 900-page monster, right? You might read 1/3 of it and say, "Yaar, abhi to theek hai, interesting hai, but abhi, like I'm anyway not going to finish it in the next week, so might as well take a break," right? With Manjhi's Mayhem, my idea was that I'll give you something which once you enter, you will say, "Yeah, khatam hi karke nikalte hain na."
And it's easy to track off. It's easy. It's tight. It's very tight. Because, the last Saturday when we were supposed to have this meeting, at Friday, I was at 100 page and मैं concert में गया था. मैं घर आया. I started reading it and I completed it in like during. But you can stay awake for this book is what I'm trying to say. Like it's tight enough to hold you that. Also, one thing is the book has the power to break your slump. I was in a slump before this and it broke my slump. There are there are very less books that I find that can break my slump personally. And I don't mean it in a bad way, okay, I was reading something and then I read this and it broke my slump. But yeah.
No, man, you're too young. You're allowed to have slumps, and if you can't break them, it's fine. I mean, you have all the time.
What does that mean? Like you're too young, like you don't
No,
have
I mean,
slumps anymore.
I'm not trying to be. So I'm sorry if I come across as condescending or anything.
I don't know.
What I'm trying to say is, at 18 I wasn't reading. So
Okay.
the fact that you're reading, that you have reading slumps, I think that itself is good enough. It's okay to have a reading slump. And yeah, I mean, and I take the compliment that Manjhi's Mayhem broke the slump. I've heard it a couple of times from other people as well. Yeah, and that's by design. Like it's a slim novel, short chapters. If there is a paragraph in which I delve into the main character's psychology, then very soon it is followed by a paragraph where something breaks or something happens, right? So there's, unlike, let's say, the literary fiction genre, right, which can give you 5 pages of interiority, and for good reason. I mean, I'm right now reading a big fat literary fiction novel, full of interiority. Sometimes
which one?
So I'm reading Devika Rege's Quarter Life.
Okay.
This one. It's a very, very good one. I mean, I'm on page around 200. It's a 420 page book. I like it. It's I mean, it's very, very different, of course, to Manjhi's Mayhem. Because it gives itself time to really explore what transformations the character is going through. And while Manjhi's Mayhem also has to do that, it is committed to being a novel of action, right? It finds very, very quickly finds ways to make something happen. And it was interesting for me because it is the first of this sort for me. So as a writer, it was quite a challenge because I've not taken on a challenge like this that, I won't let the reader go, right? They will finish it in 2 nights. So then it is a challenge. So how do you write so that it's ensured?
Nice. It also does not feel that you're writing crime for first time. I don't know why, but yeah, it kind of, because of course you are familiar with as you said, American crime and all that. It also reminded me of Wise Guys now that I'm thinking about it.
Wise Guys.
The Wise Guy. I don't know if you've read or not.
Wise Guys, the slang for mafia people.
Yes.
Wait, is there a show?
No, it's a book. It's have you seen The Goodfellas?
Yeah.
हाँ, तो वो जो जिसकी adaptation थी ना, that book is called The Wise Guy.
Okay, the wise guy. Okay.
Yeah. And because we are talking about reading and you talked
Hmm.
about how you did not used to read when you were eating. One thing that I now have started to find around me is that
Hmm.
people have started to glorify and romanticize the idea of reading, particularly not understanding what literature means or what literature does, but they just want to read, just because they think it's good for them, not knowing anything. Do you think, like, does people around you romanticize the idea of reading?
So romanticizing the idea of reading. Uh, Let us look at how many people read in India, right? First of all, and I'm trying to drive at is that even if reading and number of books read in a year or a quarter or a month or bookstagram, these appear
Huh.
to be fetishized cultural produces, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
My argument is that this fetish is very very small, right? And discourse on this fetish hides the larger crisis. The larger crisis is that we are not reading enough, right?
Hmm.
So I agree with you that yes, there is on Instagram and maybe in the US on TikTok, whichever social media website is most used, right? Because it is media, it will be used for book promotions. It will also be used for bragging generally about whatever your life experience is. And a book is a nice little object to be photographed with. Book covers are well designed, right? And you can set up a nice little paraphernalia around it, get a nice little picture, and so on and so forth, right? So all that is very much true, right? And is it broadly speaking not a very healthy thing? I agree, right? But my argument is that its impact on the larger reading discourse is minuscule. The fact
uh,
is that people read less and less now. Men read less for pleasure than women, and the difference is stark, right? Men read lesser number of novels today than women, and maybe it had changed for some time in the 20th century for big period. Maybe in the 19th century it was the same, right? Like you would imagine that in the 19th century maybe women or at least upper class women in white countries, they had all the time and so they were reading and writing. I don't know about it. But
but
right now
it
I see my colleagues, like people my age in 30s, for example, men hardly read fiction,
hmm.
right? And the more perverse trend is to equate reading with utility, right? The trend which says that I shall read a book which is useful to me, right?
uh,
Which takes fiction out of the window completely, because sentimental utility or sentimental education is how do you
uh,
join the dots, how do you
uh,
create the maths for that, right? So so I read books which help me, right? Either they inform me, they give me facts, or they build my character in some way, they are self-help books, etc. uh, and a lot of men are only reading this, right?
hmm. Hmm.
That I think is the bigger problem, rather than the fetishization of reading, which is not, which in our set on Instagram appears like a big thing, but
uh,
in the overall thing, I don't think it is that big a problem right now. The problem is that
hmm.
not enough fiction gets read,
Hmm.
and as probably a society or a civilization, we are losing the thread. कि हमको लगता है यार किसी ने नॉवल लिखा है, अभी क्या पढ़ना, मतलब
uh,
नॉवल तो
true.
I would rather read Noah Harari, learn about human civilization rather than read a novel, right?
uh,
Because उसमें मैं कुछ सीखूंगा, नॉवल में तो क्या है, किसी और की कहानी थी, खत्म हो गई, अपने को कुछ समझ, ठीक है,
uh,
अच्छी थी, right?
true.
And
True.
also because fiction का alternative है ना, fiction तो you can't escape it. There's Netflix, there's Sony, right? So the cinema and TV are anyway all fiction.
Hmm.
So that I think is there. So even among non-fiction, there is certain kinds that's read more, etc. So there is the larger narrative is that reading has become less important
Hmm.
for intelligent people, right?
Yes.
Within that, there is a subset, of course, where reading is fetishized.
Hmm. I also think the definitions of literature for people are changing constantly with time as we are evolving into this digital age. I think the idea of consumption is changing as well. Like you talked about 19th century ke women, there were no alternative for entertainment back then, right? Like people find ways to consume things. I guess that's also one of the reason why I think people are turning away from books, and that can also be one of the reason why other people who read are romanticizing the idea of reading books, because it's getting it's being constructed into a niche, I think, where if you read, you are part of a niche or a subculture.
It's also because see, a lot of Instagram subculture
Hmm.
is about not is about living a life that is not about instant gratification. There's a
Ah,
paradox here, right?
yes,
You are
yes.
on Instagram to seek instant gratification, but the content you want to be seen posting should suggest that you do not seek that life, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And reading as a fetish is part of that, right? Because once I post or continue to post about books I read, right, what I'm really announcing to the world is that, hey, my attention span is not that small, right? I can actually engage with 300-page text, right?
Hmm.
And write intelligently about it, or converse intelligently about it. So that plays out in that paradox, yeah. And of course, the real pressures on reading are of course the inundation with all kinds of media, especially the phone, right?
Hmm.
And the fact, perhaps a biological fact, that our attention spans are smaller and smaller now, right? So reading as fetish is a bad interpretation of how to beat shorter attention spans.
Ah, yes. Yeah. And talking about, because we are talking about literature, I'll tell you a story to ask my question first. So there's a boy in a storm. He's walking around. He does not know where he is. He survives through the storm, understanding that he's in a desert. He's thirsty now. He starts walking aimlessly for water. He sees a lake after a little walking, but that has no water in it. It has only books in it. There is nothing but books, and all the books are about water itself. So fictional stories about water, encyclopedias about water, and he starts reading it. He drowns himself in all these books. He forgets that he's thirsty, but in the end, he dies of dehydration. He die, he in the end dies. He's not thirsty anymore, and he's not even aware of his death, but he's dead. So I wanted to tell you this story because I think literature is more than what's at the surface, and it's a very broad idea. So when I ask what is literature for you, there can be many answers. So I wanted to ask, what is literature for you? How do you define it, and what do you think about this story as well?
Which story? Oh, the story that you
Yes.
mentioned. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, nice story. Uh, what is literature? So literature is, of course, broader than merely saying
Huh.
stories, right?
Yes.
Because literature is a broader term. It also includes uh, literary texts,
Hmm.
which are not narrative.
Hmm.
Okay, so we're talking
Hmm.
about a very wide term. Uh, I think its main business, what it is, I don't know. It's text, right? But
Hmm.
it's text that does something. What does it do? I think we should let it at saying it's text that does something, and it
Hmm.
does something to you, to some neurons in your brain, right? Now its
Yeah.
impact emotional. It can alter you, and there's no claim being made that it alters you permanently, right? It may alter you only temporarily. Uh, it alters you emotionally, perhaps permanently or temporarily, uh, or it tells you something about the world which you may remember, you may not remember, right? Uh, yeah, so broadly these two things. And so what it gives you, what engagement with literature gives you, is the chance to be different from what
Hmm.
you would be had you not engaged with it, right?
Hmm.
A year, you have a greater chance of being slightly different as a person, in your personality, in your persona, personality, whatever, uh,
Fair.
than if you didn't, right?
Uh,
But is it the only thing that does that job? No, films do that job too.
hmm.
art can do that job. Art in any form can do that job. So literature is not alone, right? So then we are talking about it as one of the arts that can do this job. So apart from that, I don't know, literature is text.
So, and also, has this book brought any change to your life, like major change? Manji's Mayhem after publishing that.
No, it's so I somehow my first was published in 2016, right? I think second by this time the second or third book came out 2019, 2020, people started telling me, yeah, you should be on Insta, you should have some Insta game,
Huh.
right?
Huh.
And uh, had I been 5 years younger, I would have understood and probably acted on it in 2018, 2019. I wasn't. I was probably too clean in my head as a writer. यार, हम तो writer है, मैं क्या करूँगा Instagram पे, right? And the only change is that with this one I tried because of two reasons. This was an out and out crime novel, right? And so I was like, यार ये तो बिकेगा ना, मतलब if I try hard or if I try speaking about it, maybe this novel will sell, right?
Hmm.
So why not? Why shouldn't I try? With the earlier ones, I didn't really try a lot myself, right? The author has to be available for marketing also, right? With this one, I made myself available. Not only did I do that, I also started shouting about it, right? And on Instagram, etc. So it's not that I'm some super big influencer or anything on Instagram, but even that rolls on. So that has been my learning, saying, like you have to accept the media of your moment, whichever social media or other forms of media are active. So that has changed the way I look to talking about my own work has slightly changed.
Hmm.
Outcome is that this has probably done better than my earlier books sales wise. But book sales in India are always abysmal, and authors only make the advance that they get on signing. Beyond that, it is very, very difficult for a book to generate more money.
Oh.
So yeah, I mean, it has sold slightly more than the other books, and partly because of the fact that I have been very active about it. And these two are the main things that have changed. It has also told me that, uh, given me the confidence to try different genres and
Uh,
redefine myself as saying, yeah, Tanuj, you probably will end up writing multiple kinds of books, right? If you
hmm.
live long enough, right? So I'm toying, for example, with the idea of writing a romance novel, right? Where two people meet, fall in love, and some weird stuff happens, and then ultimately they get to stay in love, right? Something like that. It's a very, very banal, very common at this level, the plot, but why not? Like, so if you asked me for my opinion on this 5 years, 6 years, 7 years ago, I would say no way, right? And so what it has done is the fact that I've shifted genres, so to speak. It's given me the confidence that I can do it in other genres as well.
It also gives you freedom to experiment more, right? To like before
Yeah,
you did
yeah.
like, I was.
Not only freedom, it also so now I have to write a second one, right?
Huh.
Because there is need for it, right? People are asking for the second one. So it's a beautiful kind of freedom that imposes its own deadlines. So
Mm-hmm. Nee, that's what I was exactly asking about. I was watching this interview about from a musician. I don't know who it was. He was talking about how he is very confident that he's going to find a niche, going to find popularity in some time, but he just wants to experiment till then and wants his magnum opus to be after that, or else people are going to label him. Like if Manji's Mayhem would have been the thing, you would have been labeled as a crime, a crime fictional writer or something like that. So that's what I'm talking about. Like you can experiment more with that
no,
kind
I
of
think
thing.
so. So it's not become as popular as, let's say, uh, a Vikram Chandra Secret Games or a Krishna Key, etc. Right? So the risks of me getting labeled right now are not very high because it's just not that big
Huh.
a novel right now, right? And so the most of the people commenting on it, right, or engaging with it, are people who are broadly aware of my work. So people like you are. It has also reached out to new people, like someone like you But most of the critical commentary on the book is by people who are broadly familiar with my work, right?
Okay, yes.
And so they are not going to label me as a crime writer because they know इसका भी भरोसा नहीं है ये कुछ भी कर सकता है.
Uh,
so so yeah, I've not I've actually been asked in a lot of my interviews. I've been asked, oh my god, how did you shift into, you're writing this literary sort of fiction and now you're shifting into crime fiction.
uh,
How did you shift and what was the shift like? So that has been the question. No one has started an interaction with me saying, hey, Mr. Tanuj Solanki, crime writer, right? Because they
uh,
know. Yeah.
yes. Yeah. And I have met many writers who, when they write a book or write a script, all they want to do, they of course want to tell a story, but somewhere in the mind, subconsciously, what they want to do is they want to revolutionize the style, the idea of writing. They want to do something new that's never been done before. They want to invent something new out of it. Do you ever feel while writing a book consciously, ki, okay, fuck it, this is how it's done. I'm not going to do it this way. Let's do something new, or try to find ideas, consciously sit and imagine what it is, what can be done, what is something that has not been done. Do you do stuff like that?
So with Manjhi name, it was slightly, I was calmer.
Hmm.
Yes, there is that need, right? Like you are writing a book, you want to do something, ideally you want to do something that you have not read before,
Ah,
right? Like that appears at least new to you when it comes out, right?
yes, yes.
There is that desire. I mean, at least in me, there is, and I think different writers will respond differently to this question. With Manjhi's Mayhem, the thing was there is absolute no novel like this, okay, in Indian English. And I'm not saying this to pat my back or brag. It's
Ah,
unfortunate that there isn't, right?
yeah.
And so while writing, I was pretty much convinced at the page by page, chapter by chapter level that it's a pretty new thing
Hmm.
in itself, right? It
Hmm.
didn't need to be very complicated to be new, is what I'm saying in our sort of context, right? Such stories have been around mostly in film,
Ah,
right? But in literature in India, not so much. And therefore, any expression that I find in English to convey my story, there's a good chance that it was, if I do it all right, that itself emerges as a new thing, right? At the paragraph level, it operates differently, right? So when, let's say, I'm writing a scene where Manji is washing clothes,
hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So there, of course, I want to do something new in the way I express that action and what Manji is thinking, etc. I want to do something which I have not read, which would be something novel, etc. So at a paragraph level or a part of a chapter level, it operates differently. But if you talk about the whole book, right, I was pretty convinced that just by being what I intend it to be, just by being the story that I want to tell, I think it will be new enough for
Ah,
for the literary culture that I belong to. Yeah.
fair, fair, true. And also, I do think Manji's Mayhem has the potential and credibility to be made into a film. It's very film-esque, as you said. Like it can be imagined. I was imagining it is a film only with cuts
Yeah.
and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very, actually, for me, I mean, I imagine for a lot of people, writers, it's very tough to do, huh? The making text seem
Ah,
cinematic.
yes.
Okay. Because there are several impulses that a writer is controlling.
Hmm.
uh, you focus on external reality more. You make forays into interiority less, because अगर एक character सोचता ही रहेगा 2 पेज तक, तो
Hmm.
वो सिनेमा जो आपके आंखों के सामने चल रहा है ना, वो वैनिश हो जाता है.
हाँ.
आप एक लिटरेरी मोड में चले जाते हो, जहां हाँ आप समझ रहे हो और आपको शायद मजा भी आ रहा है ये देखने में कि, या ये समझने में कि व्हाट इज द कैरेक्टर थिंकिंग, राइट? बट 2 pages back, when he bashed someone's head in a wall, right, and he threw the guy 2 meters behind, that time there was a scene running in your eyes, before your eyes, right? That
True.
vanishes, right?
True.
So I have made it vanish a few times, but I then am very sure that I want the reader to see exactly what is happening. So उसमें क्या है ना, there is a risk involved. The only way you can make the reader see is if you describe the space in which the action is happening. So Manji goes to beat a man. I describe the entire road. right?
Hmm.
The building in which he'll enter, how he
Hmm.
will enter, etc. Right?
Hmm.
So some readers get bored with that.
Huh.
They're like, अबे यार ठीक है उसको जाके पीटना ही है ना तो just cut, make him land to the room, right? So
Uh-huh.
you learn as you write and कि किधर boring हो रहा है, किधर ठीक है, etc.
Yeah. 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 But I guess the time's up, and it was a great conversation. I loved talking with you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining in.
Sure, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Bye
Thanks.
bye.
Bye.